Thank you. Hello, my name is Joshua, and today I will be talking about a prevalent issue in society. You know, I've had this friend for a while, and a male, by the way, and we developed a sense of friendship and for the past few years, and it was very interesting because I got to know him more as a person, who he was. And yes, there were things that weren't the same. His political views, his religion, his ethnic background. However, he made this statement once, saying, "I don't cry. That's for girls. I don't cry. That's for girls." And it's a very interesting statement. And I processed it and I didn't know how to respond. Toxic masculinity. What is toxic masculinity? Well, it's when one expresses emotions in a negative way, saying they need to display this tough exterior in order to conform to stereotypes. And using this idea of toxic masculinity, I decided to come up with a question. How is toxic masculinity a crucial impact within males into society? From this point on, I gathered a various amount of secondary sources. One of my secondary sources was called "The Man They Wanted Me to Be" by Jared Yates Sexton. Now, in 2019, he wrote this book outlining the idea of toxic masculinity and his perspective through his life, how toxic masculinity shaped him. And 2 points that I gathered from this were the idea of toxic masculinity and the status in through a familial perspective, and the idea of the fear of emasculation. As well, I also found an article called "Toxic Masculinity Does Exist" by Karen Brooks, and that also outlines the concept of toxic masculinity. So this book, "The Man They Wanted Me to Be" by Jared Yates Sexton, outlines various things. First of all, he was a creative writing professor at Georgia Southern University. And he also examines Trump's 2016 campaign and uses Trump as the ideal example of toxic masculinity. Also, the long-term effects in socialization in regard to toxic masculinity, which are depression, suicide, and misogynistic views. And his racist, patriarchal structure that society displays. Now, before I continue, I just want to acknowledge this cover. Now, in the cover, we see almost a body of a male figure who is holding an axe. Now, that's very interesting because in society, we see a man as the one that would be involved in lumber. We see that. So that choice of cover is very significant to the title and the concept. Now, here's a quote I found from the book that I found highly significant in relation to the status and familial perspectives. It reads, "Men were effectively the kings of the household, the final word on every matter, above reproach or question. They were to be feared and taken care of. They sat in front of a game on TV like a royal contemplating stately matters upon a throne. And like many kings, they possessed a great ability to be cruel. When their power or sovereignty, the response was anger. They yelled, They threw things. They were violent, and these outbursts always coincided with lapses in authority, humiliations at work, and any number. Now, using this quote, I gathered a various amount of notes and very important ideas. So this quote is in the prologue, and Sexton is talking about himself as a child and his father figure. And also refers to this masculine figure as a king. And I thought also an interesting part of the quote that is actually a simile says, they sat in front of a game on TV like a royal contemplating stately matters upon a throne, where he's comparing the television to the throne. That's quite interesting. As well, he says that he develops a sense of anger and frustration because he knows that he is the authoritative figure in his family. And this is important to toxic masculinity as due to society's definition as a male, they must inherit negative and rough and tough emotions, and they're not allowed to show they're soft, they're more gentle, they're more loving emotions. As well, another quote I found states, in all facets, men have actively overcompensated for their insecurities. They've built and reinforced a vast and hidden system of dominance over generations, a system that has actively discriminated against women. In an era of change and perceived crisis, they've doubled down on poisonous masculinity, which hurts every single person it encounters. But why? Obviously, men are so petrified by fear of emasculation and looking weak that they'll overcompensate until they become parodies and literally endanger themselves. So this was mentioned in chapter 12, and this is Sexton questioning the idea of fear of emasculation. Why do men fear being emasculated? And this is because they have dominance over women. And having this fear of emasculation, that dominance will be revoked. And because of this fear of emasculation, it's a destruction towards society. Men will always be over women. And that's where Sexton's trying to get at, using Donald Trump as a primary example how this society is destructive. As well, a article by Karen Brooks, Toxic Masculinity Does Exist. Now, she is a Courier Mail columnist who examined this idea, and she defines the idea of toxic masculinity as hurting young men and the product of patriarchy. Also, she ends up quoting various celebrities who also explain their view of toxic masculinity. This includes actor Meryl Streep, The Good Men Project, and writer Katie Anthony. So after reading this article, it shows how toxic masculinity hurts women, hurts children, and hurts young men. And it mentions this idea that male children aren't born to ever rape, sexual assault, abuse women. However, it is because of the way they're raised, not because of genetics. Just because you're a man does not mean you have to rape someone, have to abuse someone. It is the nurture rather than the nature, which I will also be discussing in a bit. So now, I will be discussing the concepts and the theories in which toxic masculinity has. So, going back to the idea of nature versus nurture, if we were to break this down, what is nature? What is nurture? We can see how the idea of toxic masculinity is in that. So, nature is genetics or biological factors in which shape a human. So, for example, due to their ethnicity, your skin color will be that way. If your hair is a certain way, is their hair a certain way, you will inherit that quality. Blonde hair, you will have blonde hair because of your parents. Where nurture are the societal factors, such as upbringing, life experiences, learning, that shapes an individual. And this is highly, highly important to the idea of toxic masculinity. Why? Because it is the nurture. It is one's nurture. Just because you identify as a male does not mean you need to conform to toxic masculinity. It is one's nurture. And that's what's highly, highly important within society, is that it is one's upbringing and one's societal encounters in which help define who you are and the idea of toxic masculinity. As well, another theory I want to speak about today is structural functionalism. Now, what is structural functionalism? It's an idea that all relationships, institutions, roles, and norms have a specific level of normality. So I have an example here, teachers and students. So if we take teachers and students, what is the role of a teacher? To teach the class, to instruct the class on specific concepts. What is the role of a student? To grasp the information the teacher is saying and learn from them. So, using that idea here, it kind of shows that with gender roles, how do gender roles fit into this? Because why? Men are known to be aggressive, have this sense of anger towards people. And women are supposed to sit back and they're supposed to not let anything bother them. And that is wrong. As well, societal expectations. Men are supposed to drive. Women are supposed to clean. Those are very standard, and that's structural functionalism. And order and regulations. Is there an issue with what punishments men and women receive in society? Right? If a man does something, is it bad? If a woman does something, is it bad? So, to close this off, what I have to say is that you are the change. You are able to change toxic masculinity. You are able to change how toxic masculinity is in our society. Thank you. I'm Joshua Longo. Have a good night.